everybody. My name is Rob Foster. I'm a musician and teacher here in Kansas City. I'm basically going to be starting an interview show here with a bunch of musicians. We're going to get on music teachers, musicians, luthiers, music theater people, kind of anybody that has kind of a music background, and we're going to talk about all sorts of different topics involving music and teaching and whatnot. My first guest is a musician, music lover, and teacher. Diana Foster, welcome to Music Talk.
Thank you.
Yep. How was that intro?
Good.
It was pretty awesome, right?
Yep.
So I know that you played a lot when you were a kid, and doing kind of a bunch of different instruments and things, and you're definitely been a teacher, and I have tons of teaching questions here at the end, but the first thing I wanted to ask you was, who is Maynard Zip?
That's my dad, and a musician for a long time, and a father of 7. So.
Mm-hmm. What did he do music-wise?
He came from a long family of musicians and started playing and taking lessons for sure by 10. I don't know if there was a lot before that, but I know he started accordion lessons at 10 and starting to play, and that continued through his entire life up until now, and he's 81 now.
Mm-hmm.
And I know as a teenager he moved from the accordion to the piano and guitar, I think. I think he told me he got his first guitar from Sears Roebuck,
Mm-hmm.
and which is funny. It was a mail order guitar, and then he started after he met my mom and they married, they started a combo in Omaha, Nebraska, and played accordion and drums. That would have been interesting to hear what that sounded like.
Would that have been early 50s then, or
that
40s?
Would have been, about between 55 and 60 there. They graduated in 54.
Yeah.
So it would have been around that time. And then throughout his life, he had many different bands and played in many different bands, but had a continued love of music and always played by ear also.
Mm-hmm. And shameless plug, he's a little bit of a rock star. I mean, he just got into the Nebraska Country Music Hall of Fame a couple years ago.
He did.
He's been playing 60 years or something,
He did.
right?
He grew up in Nebraska and lived in Nebraska a number of times. He currently lives back in Nebraska, and 3 of the 7 of us kids, I think, were born in Nebraska.
Yeah.
So we have a
He's
pretty
got some
big,
huge ties there. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I forgot to mention, you are unfortunately my mother as well. So he's my grandfather we're talking about here. And so he started you playing music, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely started me having the appreciation for music and the love of music.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was in 8th grade, my sister and I were asked by him to be in the family band, which was kind of funny because our first reaction was, okay. And we were a little lukewarm on it because we were just at that age of being teenagers and thinking about maybe dating in the next couple of years. So the thought of being with my parents in a family band playing every Friday and Saturday night instead of out with friends was kind of interesting, but it grew into a huge love and a huge part of my family my life to be in that band.
Sure, yeah. And the family band was a bunch of you over the years at random times, but it was also a bunch of people from the community, right? Random guitar players and stuff.
Right.
It's like a lot of morphing, right?
It was a lot of morphing. I think 4 of the 7 of us kids played in the band, and depending, there was a time where it was only family, but then there was a time where there were other members in the community in the band.
Yeah.
And that family band was pretty primarily Iowa instead of Nebraska. We lived in
Right.
Iowa at the time.
And getting back to your Friday and Saturday thing, I know you guys have joked and Dad has joked about that to like date a zip girl or whatever you had to date on Sundays or
That's
whatever,
right.
right?
That's right.
That's kind of
Or
silly.
come be a roadie and carry equipment
Right,
in and
yeah.
out. One of the two.
Yeah, this is what you get, right? You have to come be a roadie. That's the rule. Yeah, so I know for both of us, he's been kind of the music wise, he's been kind of the patriarch of the family, you know, kind of making this what maybe he didn't really understand at first, but kind of now seeming like making this huge lineage of musicians since. And you said that his dad.
His
What
dad
does
played
that do?
music
Yeah.
also. I remember as a child hearing his dad play piano. And then in later years, when I interviewed Dad for the Country Music Hall of Fame, I heard that he also played violin. I didn't know that till later years.
Yeah, but he's obviously been, you know, a huge influence music wise. I mean, he's been a huge influence on many things, but music wise, this lineage of each generation kind of starting. We even have Dan's son is even playing now, so now that's the fifth, right? So him, Maynard, you guys, me and Dan, and then his kids now. So that's that's really cool. Tell me about you. So you definitely played some piano, right? You
In
you
the
took
band-
a couple lessons, right?
I took some lessons in elementary school in piano. I would say maybe only a year or so. And then in the band, I actually started on bass guitar, not piano, to start with. So my sister and I both went and took just maybe 1 or 2 bass lessons. And then within a pretty short time, we were already playing in a small town little bar, and that was on bass guitar.
Yeah. And before we move on to that, so tell me some of the places that you guys would be playing. I mean, and you guys would do. Me and my buddy Scott always joke about the animal circuit, right?
Right.
The Lions Club, the Moose Lodge, the Eagles, right? American Legion, right? That's a Garth Brooks term. He coined that term, the animal circuit. But like, where else would you guys play?
We played probably more private parties than we played public places.
Yeah.
Because he had lived in Iowa for years and years. Everyone knew him. So wedding dances, anniversary dances, birthday parties, that type of thing. And we would be hired to go to wherever they had rented and play.
And then he owned a bar for a while too.
Yeah,
That was
bar-
after that.
It was
though.
after
Yeah.
that, after
Yeah.
we had all the kids had been at home and played in the band.
Yeah, and then
But I think he played
Right.
in that venue, but
Right. Yeah.
I didn't play there.
Yeah. So okay. So then bass. You've always told me this story about your bass that's always cracked me up. Tell me how he told you to play country music, or how that went.
Well, it's really interesting because I, at the time, of course, was more into rock music as far as being a teenager in the 70s, classic rock bands, and very much into pop and the Carpenters and everything everybody was into, especially girls in the 70s. But his band's always been a country band, and from traditional country to more new country that was starting at that time. And so when we went to take lessons, we of course had a love of music by then, and some basic understanding from piano lessons and just being around it. But I thought it was interesting more in years later, thinking about him telling about how simple it was going to be in a way. Not that country music is simple and not interesting, but that playing it wasn't really going to be that difficult, because many of the songs are 3 chords, or not too many more than that.
Yep.
So if you're playing in the key of C and you're really nervous because you've just started, and you're wondering which of the two chords to go to because you're not quite sure. And I'm simplifying this, especially to someone with a music degree, but we didn't have a music degree, that, you know, he's like, well, you've got two choices. If you're in C, you're going to F or you're going to G. If you played one and it didn't sound like, it must be the other one. And it was really about that simple, but it was more powerful than that. I realized, not at the time, but later, that number one, it was a way to instill confidence and a way to instill that this thing that we do as a family really isn't that difficult. It's really fun and it's not that difficult, that that it's okay, that you're trying, you're learning, and you're training your ear to say, well, now I know if it's F or G because I just know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know from playing in some country bands that there's mistakes all over the place. You know, I mean, people, and sometimes they'll throw songs at you right now and deal with it on stage. And so that moment sitting there of, oh, it's G, you know, and then you fix it that fast, you know, and I think you're right that he didn't really word it in that way, but he was also, like you just said, with the confidence or whatever of it's not that big a deal when you mess up. You fix it in a second and then you're back on. And so it's like, because you guys were young too. I mean, 8th, 9th grade.
Actually, my sister was 7th grade and I was 8th grade.
Right? Yeah. So you guys were pretty young. Mm-hmm. And probably in a fairly intimidating scenario with it, maybe even having some more adults in the band as well, not just him, but and then you guys being out of bars. I mean, that was going to be probably a pretty intimidating situation, but he was really good about that, of wording it in that way of he maybe didn't even realize he was doing that, but he was doing that, of giving you the confidence. I know that when I talk to my students about improv and things, there's just some people in the world that just figure it out, you know, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask you about that, because there's and just a mini story. Like I remember, like when I played sports and you're shooting at the basket and you're sort of turned, you turn so much and then you can shoot it. Well, the next time you come down and you're barely not turned enough, then you just, when you play basketball, you just figure it out. You turn less and you shoot it, you know. It's like nobody tells you that, you just do it, you know. Right. And can you speak a little bit about that, of people that aren't that like for improv, for example, that they just are like, what do I do? What do I play? You know, and you're like, I don't know, just try something, you know, like.
It's a bit instinctual, but also it's a bit genetic. It's a bit of all of that. But you don't make those mistakes for very long because you do have the ear to know, okay, F is lower than G, and you just have started to figure it out. So you may make those mistakes practicing and at the first gig or two, but you kind of figure it out. You just figure it out. And I learned to look at the 6-string guitar and know what a D looked like, even though I wasn't playing that. And if I had a question, I'd look over and think, I don't think that, I know what chord he's playing right now, so that's the chord I need to be playing.
Right. Yeah, I just think that's awesome when people, because some people have that and some people don't. Right. And I think that could be a learned skill. I think, you know, obviously something as simple as stare at my chord, it's a D, you know. I mean, that's a pretty simple thing, but that general intuitiveness, I think, is really important with people, that some people just don't have naturally. I just think that's funny. Yeah. So then you're playing in the band, and tell me a little bit about not necessarily the perception of the family and the band, but taking stuff that is like that you looked at it as a very positive experience, and one thing I've definitely learned from you is that taking something that's sort of bad and turning it into something good. I think you're probably the queen at that, better than any person I know. Can you talk to me about, like, for example, like you alluded to it about you were starting and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to be in this band or not, and then see what's happened later. Can you just talk about your general philosophy of that attitude a little bit, of taking something that you didn't think was going to be good or that wasn't going to be positive, and then lemonade into out of lemons kind of? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think the same thing's true about your attitude and your perception and your thought about life as what we just said about, how you know how to play by ear. You don't even know that you can, except that other people who can say this is really easy and you can. Mm-hmm. But I think, I don't know that I thought playing in the band was a bad idea or that anybody else in the family did, but I was a little lukewarm about starting it. But I think that you also kind of have that in your blood of what kind of personality you were given, what kind of personality you develop, and that's just kind of the person I am, that I look at everything and decide I'm going to make the best of this. And so many of those things I end up growing to love, and some of them grew to be fairly good at. And I think part of it is just the personality that you were given at birth, but I think you can develop that and decide that that is the attitude I'm going to have about most things. Even if they weren't very fun, nor were they very easy at the very beginning, that I'm going to try to make this an awesome thing and learn from it. And then now in later life, I look back on some of those things, and this is one of those, to realize the power of that and what that gave to me and what I learned from that situation of being asked in 8th grade to be in the family band.
Mm-hmm. This is, I guess, a little more broader question on that issue of I think one thing you're really good at is when you do see a problem in a general sense, you're coming at it from a creative standpoint, like where you have like, how can I take this thing that's bad, not even that I think is going to be bad, but something that is sort of bad in your life, and you have a creative mentality of, okay, well, I could change it. Like I'll give you an example. So when I had a time where I had the same phone number for a long time, and I had to drop my phone, and I was really annoyed at that, because I'm like, oh man, look at all the work I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to change my website. I'm going to have to call all these people. I'm going to have to, but then I thought about it for 2 seconds, and I'm like, whoa, wait a second. I can now send out a pretty shameless free advertising to all my friends. Hey, remember me? This is my new phone number. And then I basically got a free blast out to my friends about that I'm out here, gigging and stuff. And that maybe gave me an excuse to redo my website anyway. That was like a different mentality on a problem that I thought was going to be really annoying. Can you talk a minute about, because I know you're great at that, and I'm sure I've rubbed off on you on that. There's a lot of people aren't like that, and that's a huge problem in the world right now, that people only see bad.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy to have that mentality, because it can mean extra work, it can mean reframing the way you think and what you're doing. But it's pretty powerful if that's the way you live your life, that's for sure. And things tend to work out a little better. And it's easier to do it the older you get, the more life experience you have behind you, because you can see the benefits of it, and you can see the benefits of having a positive attitude and turning things around and not looking at what's wrong about the situation, but looking at what could be right, or how you could make it more right. And I think I'm better at it, and I see how many times that's worked out for me in my life, to have that attitude instead of a more negative attitude. And
yeah, so cool. So kind of back to music. Tell me about, so this was during high school that you played mostly with the band. Tell me a little bit more about tell me about your auditioning for All State Orchestra. Or all state choir, sorry.
Okay. Well, when I was a junior or senior, it was either junior or senior year, it was right at the end, I had been hearing some of the kids talk about something, a quartet they were singing in Des Moines and things they were going to be doing, and I had been in choir all 4 years and really consider myself more of a vocalist than an instrumentalist for sure. And so I went to the teacher. I don't remember if I asked the kids or the teacher first, and hey, what's going on? It sounds like some buzz is going on, like something cool's going on. And one of the groups said that there was a quartet that was going to try out in Des Moines for Iowa All-State Chorus. And so I was like, well, that kind of sounds like what the athletes do for All-State band or All-State basketball. And
Big deal, yeah.
big deal. So I was like, I want to do that. I think I need to do that. And that sounds fun. I think I can do that. So I went and asked the teacher, and she said if I could pull together a quartet, that she would allow me to try out. She would take 2 quartets. And so I went and rustled up I'm a soprano, so I rustled up a tenor and an alto and a bass, and we tried out the 2 quartets, and
It wasn't the bass.
yeah, I knew I had the bass covered because my boyfriend was a bass, and so he, which is now my husband, which is now Rob's dad, and that's funny.
Yeah, it is funny.
Anyway, so we go and try out in quartets, and it was a cappella, really difficult music, more classical music, and more difficult than, as it should be, than what we were already singing in high school. And
the band, it was way different than the band.
Yeah, way different from the band. And since I play mostly by ear, I read music because of singing in choir, but it wasn't like I was brilliant at it. So I really had to practice, and I was selected for All-State Orchestra. And I don't think I realized the power in that also until a few years after that. Number one, I hadn't been chosen to be the soprano in the original quartet. And I don't even remember thinking that was terrible or it was ridiculous or in any negative thing, other than I realized later that I was advocating for myself to the teacher and saying, whatever this elite thing is, I want to do that, and I think I can do that. And I was the only one of the 8 that was selected.
Yeah.
So I think I wasn't far off in what I wanted to try to do, even though I wasn't sure I could. I didn't even know about it. I'd never heard of it. But I realized later that it was really way more than the music part of it. It was believing in myself, advocating for myself, knowing that I'm an okay singer and I can hold pitch and that kind of thing. And that ended up being a pretty defining moment, one of the defining moments as far as confidence and standing up for myself and asking to do something that I'm not exactly sure I can do, but I ended up doing that, and it was a pretty cool thing. Yeah,
because that's a really big moment, because I know when we talk about teaching and parenting and stuff, we talk about being the other person in the support system, that you need to support the person you're talking about. But what you're talking about is there eventually has to be something from the actual person. I mean, the support system can impact your self-confidence or whatever in a drastic way, but you even had pushback. I mean, in a little bit of way, right? Not that the teacher told you couldn't do it, but you didn't have the ultimate, oh, you're perfect, good job, you can do it. You had to advocate yourself, and that's big. I mean, that's
And like I said, I'm not sure why I wasn't chosen to be the original soprano, but I felt I could do it, and it really ended up working out.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so then you have your high school days or whatever. Tell me Tell me what the Suzuki method is.
Well, I had never heard of Suzuki. The method of teaching music or Shinichi Suzuki or anything about him. And I think, I'm trying to remember, you were probably 2.5 or 3, and I was watching a Phil Donahue show way back when.
That's 80s style right there.
Early 80s, and one day you were down for a nap, and so was your brother, and I'm looking at this show about the Suzuki method to teach stringed instruments. And I also wasn't very familiar with cello and violin and viola and bass and all that, because we had played electric instruments in the country band, and I didn't grow up with that. We went to a small high school. We didn't have an orchestra or anything, but I watched that 1 hour show, and there wasn't internet at the time, but I was like, I have got to, or if there was, it was very new. I have got to find out more about this, because it was more impressive to me as a teacher almost than the music part of it, because right away I was like, this whole method for teaching is so spot on. It is so awesome, from the literature they were using to the methodology that they were using to teach, and that there was such a high parent involvement, that parents were expected to stay at the lesson. There's no dropping your child off at piano lessons at the door, leaving, not having a clue how to play yourself or how to support them in practice all week. And a lot of those things. And I knew right away that I was hopefully going to promote music lessons with my kids before I even had kids, for sure, when both you and your brother were born.
Yeah, you had that on the brain.
Right. I didn't really have anything in mind, whether it would be singing or instrument or whatever, but I certainly had something in mind after that day I saw the show. And so I honestly, since it's been a long time ago, I don't remember exactly the route I went, but somehow I came across a public school music teacher that had gone for her Suzuki training and decided that she was going to start a Suzuki music program in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And so I contacted her, and I don't know how I found her. I don't know how. I don't remember. But you were the first student that she had. We were interviewed by the newspaper just because it was something new in the Fort Dodge area. And I think there were a few. There was a handful of kids in that beginning group, and
because we have pictures of a big group. I mean, you know, of when we were very young,
and so we started you on lessons when you were 3 on violin, and then the next year, when your brother, or 2 years later, when your brother was 4, we started him on cello, and.
So talk about that, because the two things with it, because I went through the program, so I definitely, both of us have a very high understanding of what it is, you know. So like the first thing that is amazing is that parent involvement. So talk about that. So it's not just lessons, right? Like
No, you really are expected to attend the lessons. Now, I don't know so much when you get up to be high school or junior high as it's that important, but definitely with 3 and 4-year-olds, that
they can't do nothing, right?
They can't do anything, not much anyway. And so you attend the lessons, you take notes. They actually encourage that the parent rents a violin, a full-size violin. Most of the kids at 3 are starting on a 16th size violin, which you did.
So the parent is playing along with the kid.
The parent is playing along with them. I've never played violin, but you can model. You're taking lessons. A 3-year-old's not going to remember what's assigned that week for lessons. You're taking notes, but then you're intricately involved in the lessons at home as well, and given good advice about a 3-year-old really needs like a 10-minute lesson. That's about it for attention span. But it'd be better to do a 10-minute lesson 7 days a week than try to do a half-hour lesson 1 day a week.
Right before the lesson.
So it's really a different approach than traditional music lessons, whether they're trumpet or they're saxophone or their piano or voice, in the fact that you drop your student off and the teacher would take notes and whatever, but you also send them to the den to practice, not necessarily sitting there with them. So to me, I could tell as an educator that that was going to be a very successful.
Oh yeah. You can't beat that, right?
Right.
I told my students it's like assistant teacher with you at home.
Right.
You know, I mean,
Right.
yeah. And you also are obviously getting some massive like support, just emotional support from the parent, right?
Right.
That they're literally doing it with you.
Right.
You know. Yeah, so that was the first thing that I thought was really cool later on, realizing how powerful that was. Talk about the ear training.
Well, in Suzuki, and I don't claim to be a Suzuki teacher, so it's what I know as a parent, but you do the ear training before the sight reading. So in that approach, their thought is that if your brain isn't wired to really learn to start to read words until 7, probably music is somewhat the same. Well, Suzuki, which started in Japan, they start having their child listen to the Suzuki tapes in utero as the minute they're born, and for the most part, around 3 to 5 years old, you start actually playing. And so you've been listening and honing in on your ear training and your listening skills since however soon the parent starts that, and for sure by 3 or 4. Well, if you think about not then learning to sight read and starting the note reading till 7, you have 3 to 5 years of that ear training of listening. So for example, in Suzuki Book 1, you're listening to the first 3 songs continually, even though when you're just starting the twinkles and the variations of the twinkle. So by the time you get to Go Tell Aunt Rhody or you get to one of those first songs, you've been listening to it for months. And so you have memorized it, you've memorized how it sounds, you've memorized the pitch,
The rhythm,
and the
everything.
rhythm,
Yeah, yeah.
everything. And so those kids end up kids/adults/ junior high, young adults and teens have such a good ear. Because they started with the ear training and the listening training, and they're also good sight readers because they are taught that. But it seems like many people who started with the sight reading can have resistance or trouble going back to the ear training because they don't trust themselves that they cannot have the music in front of them at the piano or on the music stand.
Yeah. So we've seen what's happened with me, playing, improvising and going off into bands and stuff and having this massive ear training, at the beginning of my life. And so so I guess using the ear training, that was kind of hilarious, like even when I got to 6th grade and I did that musical, right? And like I'm sitting out there and it's Oklahoma. Yeah, Oklahoma. So we're sitting out there and they're doing this musical play in the elementary school, and she knew that I can't be in 4th grade strings because it's like I'm like 6 years ahead of all the other kids, or 5 or whatever. So she put me in advanced strings. And then she's like, okay, Libby Comer was her name, and she's like, I need to give him something to do,
some opportunities and something to keep motivation going and challenge you. And
so that was a moment where Surrey with a Fringe on Top and all those great songs, Oh What a Beautiful Morning, and all those songs in that musical. I'd heard those a million times already, and so I don't know how she figured this out, but probably during class I was just like, oh, that one, da 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 da, and I just played it, and so she had me come up before the musical started and sit there in front of it, in front of the auditorium and just play
background,
it. Yeah, but that was all year, right? That was
I think that was awesome for her as an educator, that she was trying to find ways to continue motivating you. So being in beginning strings where kids were just learning the names of the strings and you were playing Gavotte from Mignon or whatever you were playing at the time, it was, she found opportunities to challenge you and let you do things for your interest level, but also your ability level, and that was the signs of a really good teacher. I
Sure,
think.
yeah. And then last thing on this, and then I want to get to some more teaching stuff to finish up here. But tell everybody what she said to you.
About you learning
Yeah.
to sight read. So you
Yeah.
would have been 10 because in the public school, in most schools, but in our area here, you could start strings in 4th grade, and you're usually 10 in 4th grade. So you were already, you could read music, but you were relying a little bit more on your ear than you were on reading the music, because if you had heard it a few times by practicing it, or the teacher was playing it on the piano, or singing it, or humming it, or whatever,
Yeah.
then you really just memorized it. So she said, and at home, when I was still working with you and practicing with you, I might, read the treble clef and play it on the piano. And she said, stop singing it, stop humming it, stop playing it. Buy an etude book, which isn't any melody. It's not a song. It's just notes. And of course, you learned really quickly then, but she had really good advice that his ear is so good that
He ain't gonna be reading it anymore.
he's not reading it. He's just listening to it a couple times and he's got it, because they were fairly simple songs. So that was good advice, and it didn't take very long, and that you were a good sight reader. But
Yeah, that's the funny thing that I find about, because that's the number one retort to Suzuki is because
that they don't learn to read music.
That they don't learn to
or
read,
learn
and when
early
you're
enough.
when you're in orchestra, you just have to.
Right.
Short of a few blind
Right.
people that can handle it, but so that's the biggest argument against Suzuki. But what I find funny, and I know you and I have talked about this, is that when you get to high school, their whole freaking front row is Suzuki kids,
Right.
and so the teachers are like getting mad at Suzuki because they know their kids can sight read, but then all their best kids are 6 years
And
ahead, and they've
even-
got way better ears. They
Right.
got, their pitch is better, their rhythm is better than all the other kids.
Right. Even though they're not actually looking at the book and sight reading, the theory has already started at 3 through the music games, through looking at music symbols. What is this? What is this? And the other methodology. So you're doing all the precursors to that, just that the brains of many 3-year-olds are not ready to read music.
Yeah. So cool. So the last little thing that I wanted to talk to you about a little bit is your teaching. Then after you started us, you kind of started on your pretty thick teaching career there. You taught special ed 24 years, right?
Yeah, I was a special educator. I went to school for that, both undergraduate and master's, and I taught for 25 years. But I think I had taught 4 or 5 years before I had you and your brother, and then went back after you were both in school full time. And it was interesting. I think that's some of the things that I saw about some of the many positive things about being in that family band that I saw many years later, that I already had the love of music before he asked if we wanted to join the band. And by the way, I was in the family band for 15 years playing.
Yeah,
Even
wow.
after I got married and had kids, I would play on New Year's Eve or special things if I was able to. But I then continued my love of music through starting my own 2 children in music and being able to enjoy watching that progress and process, and that both you and your brother were extremely musical and did very well, and you ended up creating a career of that and getting your own music ed degree. But I already knew about the therapeutic value of music in the fact that it was in our home. We didn't have TV on that much. We didn't really watch that much sports. At least when I was at home, there were 7 children, so lots of things happened after I left home. But and I wasn't an athlete, but there was always music being played, being practiced, being rehearsed,
And listened to,
all that. And I end up starting in special education, and I taught children that were had pretty significant delays and disabilities, and it really implemented, without even really knowing I was going to, it wasn't really premeditated, a lot of music in my classroom. Because since my main instrument is vocal, you always have your voice with you.
Yeah.
You don't have to have an instrument and cart it around. You can sing on the playground, you can sing walking down the hall, and you can sing anywhere, on the bus.
Yeah.
And I ended up finding about how calming it was to kids who were upset, how you could teach academic skills through songs, and many of the children's songs are singing, counting and ABCs and learning academic things, but ended up doing a lot of that in my classroom. And I've told you the funny story about finding pianos. Somehow finding pianos, or maybe the pianos found their way to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Every school I
That's
was
very
in,
zen.
yeah,
Very zen
every
of you,
school
yeah.
I was in, I would get there and I'd say, "Whose piano is that in the hallway?" And people would say, I don't know. I'd go ask the music teacher. I don't know, I think that came out of the kindergarten room, but the new kindergarten teacher doesn't play piano. So I'd go ask the principal, can I have that piano? And they're like, yeah, that'd be fine. It's going out to the shed. And so I would end up either bringing it into the classroom or having it in some area we could go to, because all of my children got to go to music just like all the other students did for the same amount of times, and they were integrated with the general education students to have music. But sometimes behavior would preclude them being able to stay or being able to understand or whatever. And so in addition to them getting traditional public school music, they got music in my classroom and with this piano, and that ended up being a big part of my instruction in the public school, is using music, even though I wasn't trained as an adapted music teacher or music educator, but the love of music and that permeated my teaching.
Yeah, so I know the last stuff I want to talk about is a little bit about motivation. So you've had a cool philosophy that you've talked to me about a lot about in regards to motivation, where motivation doesn't have to be cookies and candy and money or whatever.
Right.
You probably used your music in different ways as motivation, right?
Absolutely. And you know, everyone loves to sing, everyone loves to dance, especially children.
Yeah.
And they love to be sang to, they love to sing with you and clap, and it's a way that students who have anxiety, and we all have anxiety at times, that if nothing else was working, we could sing, we could hum, we could go take a walk, and we could do that. And it was a huge motivator to go to music time.
Yeah.
And I could have a 10-minute music time every single day in my classroom, where they might have only had music once a week in the music room with the music teacher, and it was a supplemental thing, and it was a calming activity, and it was a fun activity.
Yeah. Talk about, and you've talked to me a lot about using games in your, especially for like the 1st through 4th grade specifically, maybe even a couple of years after that, but
Right.
You've talked to me a lot about how like music games, so talk about that for a second.
We definitely used games during music time, and knowing any children, I always taught pretty much kindergarten through 3rd, so that's 5 to 8 or 9 year olds.
Right.
I have taught older, but primarily the 25 years was 90% that age group. And there's no group other than preschoolers and toddlers that like games better than that group of kids. And music games is no exception. So I bought musical instruments. They were nothing expensive, just what a toddler and preschool and kindergartners would use, but they love having a tambourine or the bells or maracas or that, and being able to learn rhythms. And we always had a lot of paraprofessionals that worked in our classroom, and you need that in this type of classroom. So we could do hand over hand, we could teach them rhythms, and they don't sit still very well. All children of that age, especially children with disabilities, and they were able to stand and dance and jump and play the instruments and follow directions, like do this, and then I could show them a rhythm, or we could sing together, and it was very powerful. Like I said, many of the folk tunes, as well as just traditional songs that you sing to children, teach skills of counting and ABCs and that kind of thing. And so it was therapeutic, but it was also academic, because you're teaching following directions, and in a way that is different and way more fun than sitting and trying to have a child do a worksheet that doesn't want to do a worksheet at the table.
Yeah. You were telling me about maybe just give, I don't know, 2 or 3 of those examples of music games, like in a private lesson setting, that you could do. Because we've talked about that a lot, and the fact that us teachers think they're completely dumb, right? This little game you're doing is the dumbest thing in the world, but to the kid it's not, right?
Well, it was a little different with me as a parent and the games that you played in Suzuki as what I did in the classroom, because we have certain things that need to be taught in the public school. But for example, when you and your brother were taking Suzuki music lessons from 3 to 6, you might have a game where you're learning posture, and you're learning the rest position for holding a violin and the play position. So there'd be games of Simon Says, or follow the leader, or do this, and the teacher would model the way that you should stand in rest position. If the teacher says, we're in rest position, all right, everybody do play position. And so that would be a game, but it was teaching really important skills about how to hold the violin, how to not play with your bow as a sword and that type of thing. But also there would be games to learn the musical symbols. You haven't started reading music yet, but you need to know treble clef and bass clef if you play cello and all that. So you can do flashcards, but kids like to move. They like movement. They like to get up. So you could have a game where you are going and looking for something on the floor and going and standing on it. So there's all sorts of games. There's following directions, singing games, where you're modeling what someone is singing.
So, and so you'd put some stuff on the floor, right? You'd put little papers on the floor and go stand on
the treble clef, or treble clef, or the word forte, or whatever skills it was that you were teaching. Yeah,
and those are really, like I said, I think teachers like myself that are really good with the older kids, that seems really dumb, but that's exactly what you're doing. And I know I had to get over the idea that, like, for example, kindergarten's about following directions, and that's it. They're not really learning a whole lot. It's just about sit on the floor in a circle with everybody else, and just learning the actual symbols, or what is a high sound, what is a low sound. I know you're great at stuff, or thinking, because you and I joke all the time about, your paras are like, I can't even think that low, and I know you and I have talked about that a ton of times.
Also, for example, when I was doing music with the kindergarten through 2nd graders in the public school, I would do things like they love to hold props. Also, if you're holding props, you're not doing other things with your hands that you shouldn't be doing. You know, rolling around, touching other people, whatever it is kids do at that age. But if we were singing a song like Bingo, there was a farmer had a dog, Bingo was his name, oh. I would have BINGO. Well, everyone has their hand up so high. I hope I get to be one of the 5 to hold the B, the I.
Yeah.
It sounds silly. It's not silly to kids. They love that. And so when it was their turn, they lifted the B on BINGO or the letter that you were working on, and that's really fun. It's powerful. Same thing with not everyone got to hold a musical instrument during that song, but
yeah, that's
when
really
it was
neat.
their turn, they love that.
It's just hard for people to get into that mindset of knowing what those things are. It's going to be motivating. So last thing I wanted to ask you was, I know you've talked about Jane Smith was one of your other. She taught with you, right?
Right.
And you've talked to me about a funny thing because you guys had to deal with those parent-teacher conferences that are sometimes kind of tough, you know, in your area where you're kind of sometimes telling the parent some things that they don't exactly difficult news about their child, etc. And but one thing that you were joking about with Jane is, and that you were making an extreme example, but she's like, she would tell people that they're about ready to die, but then by the end of the conversation, she's thanking them. You know, like she just has that way of telling you.
She had a good way of giving people news that might be hard to receive, but she presented it in a really great way.
Yeah, I would argue that you're good at that as well. She's maybe really good at that, but you're also very good at that and this gets back to a very general topic of motivation in general, of how do you, what is our role towards somebody else in regards to motivation? How far can we go? What can we say? Can we make them or can't we make them? You know, whatever the situation is. I know that what I've talked to you about a lot as a private teacher is you're sitting there and you're seeing either the student or the parents, and they're portraying a certain amount of effort or a certain amount of commitment to this lesson or whatever, and you and I have talked about what are not even what the do's and don'ts are, but what is probably not going to work, you know, or how much to expect, or can you just talk a minute about your philosophy of that?
Well, thanks for the compliment. I don't think that at the beginning of my career I was as good at doing what you complimented me about as I was toward the end, but I think number one, in motivating people, you have to have a basic respect for other people to begin with. And if they trust you and know that you really respect them as a person, if the student knows that, if the teacher knows, or if the parent knows that, you're already halfway there on that, on helping people get motivated. And it's a challenge for all teachers and all parents and pretty much everyone to be a positive influence on people and how you could positively motivate them to do what it is you want them to do. But I think that general respect and knowing that really people motivate themselves, but you can certainly create environments that make them want to be motivated more than environments that really hinder them being motivated. And certainly you can't put a sledgehammer to people's heads. You have to build a rapport with them, and even when things aren't going well, you have to be respectful and everyone know that you really want the best for them. And then you have to have a lot of strategies in your arsenal and under your belt to when people are fidgeting around and having excuses, or they didn't practice, or they didn't do their homework, and working with them and telling them why it's so important, and helping them get ideas about how they could practice at home and come back, and how they could be a little more effort into it, because the outcome will be better for them. They'll play better at school, or they'll learn their ABCs, or they'll learn to count to 3, or they'll learn their addition tables or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not easy, but a really good teacher can help motivate people, but they choose to be motivated in the end of it all.
Right.
And if you're a good teacher and you hang with it and you learn a lot and go, teach a lot of children, you become better at it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I think parents and teachers become better at motivating other people the longer they do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, like I said, for my private students, I deal a lot more with, to me, it's a lot more with the parents than it is the kid, especially the younger, the younger they get, high schoolers, they need to start doing some stuff on their own, or having their own internal motivation themselves. But so I'll sit there, and it always floors me at the stuff that trumps something else. That's always fascinated me in the world, how you can, for example, you can have literally all the best strategies possible in the universe, but if they just are, if the parents I'm not doing it, then you're done. All of your knowledge is now out the window, because so that's why I'm always fascinated by that, of telling the parent, listen to these Suzuki CDs over and over and over. You need to, be practicing with them. Only do 10 minutes. Only do, and I just find that really funny that, and then so I would want to go through and tell them, what do you think about the idea of because I had a lot of success, or not success, but I had a lot of, you were talking about, growing experience at things like contests and concerts and stuff. So as a teacher, I would want to, as one of my motivators, to throw something external at them, like a chair audition in orchestra, or a contest, or a concert, where you are giving them this opportunity to step up themselves, where it's not just you telling in lesson, but you set this concert in October or something, and then you keep telling them, all right, and so now you have this. Or the kids at school can be also another external motivator. I want to beat that kid, I want to beat him at chairs or whatever. But sometimes that doesn't work, right? Because they have to eventually come.
Right.
What do you think about that attitude of so that's basically trying to I hate this word, but that's almost trying to force it out of them, force the motivation out of them by throwing this.
Well, you always want to I would call it challenging them, really. You always want to set opportunities that, are a little bit of a stretch for them, that they maybe wouldn't have thought of it. They're a little scared of it, but it also challenges them. I think that's what your teacher did in 6th grade by saying, do you want to play in front of the whole school and all the parents?
Right.
And I don't know that you were afraid of that, but it was probably a little more of a challenge than what you were doing in strength class right at that time. And so she kind of presented a challenge there, and continued to do so. Back on that, you're right. I think that if you're teaching children, whether it's music or whatever you're teaching, and they're under middle school or high school, you are working a lot with the parent, because they're your co-teacher when you're not there. So you're right, you are working with them. And I would say in the case of a music teacher, that parent is probably fairly motivated. If they brought their child, found you as a teacher, and they're paying for lessons, they actually do want their child to do well. But some parents, I don't really know what the percentage is, you might know more than me, but of parents that have their children take lessons that actually played an instrument themselves. But I think there's a fair amount of them that didn't play an instrument, but they see the value in it, and they want their children to be well-rounded, and they're also doing sports and other activities, which is all great. But I think they do need to have that educator give them really good ideas, because they don't always have them themselves on what activities do I do, how often should we practice, what's the normal, and that's the job of the educator, is to not only motivate the student but motivate the parent that, if you're practicing a little bit every day, you're probably going to make more progress than practicing a long time only once a week. But
you're reinforcing those,
right.
You're reinforcing the bow grip and the fingers,
right.
and the terminology too, right? They're hearing that stupid word quarter note out,
Right. So I think that you're right, that you're working a lot with the parent, and the public school teachers only have conferences, a few times a year, but the music teacher probably sees that parent every lesson, either picking them up, dropping them off, or sitting in on the lesson. So you can really help that person. And then I kind of address the challenging students, and I think that it is good. They don't always like that. They don't always react well at the beginning, but sometimes they are pretty excited about it when they get an opportunity to do something that's more advanced, that they.
So last question is that idea there that and every single parent has to deal with this, where you're sitting there, learning how to sweep is a really, really good idea for this kid, right? You can't even start arguing that point with somebody that this isn't a good idea, that you learn this skill. Or a great example is learning how to just sit there, like in kindergarten, learning how to sit still, or whatever the skill is as a parent or teacher. That's where I'm at a standstill myself, is when I can give you my 19-page reasoning of why this is a good idea, and why learning how to do improv will help you in all of your life, or learning the confidence of playing this concert, or the sweeping, or the mowing the lawn, or whatever. Last question is, what is our role in regards to, again, I hate this word, but kind of, I don't really care if you like it or not. You need to learn this, because this is what all people in society do when the kid doesn't want to do it. Like,
Well, it's really hard, especially I think in music lessons, because you, as an adult, nothing to do with being a parent of musicians or loving music or playing in the family band, that I hear stories more of people that started lessons and quit more than your story.
Yeah.
Started lessons and never quit.
Yeah.
And every one of them say, I wish my parent would have never let me quit lessons at 4th grade.
Yep.
Except that they were raising such a ruckus, the parent finally gave in, and I understand why, because they wear you down. And
then they're like, why'd you let me quit? Right?
But if they truly aren't going to try, and they're just done with it, that they are done with it. They tried it, they didn't love it, and they maybe weren't as good at it as other people, and they knew that. So as a teacher, whether it's working with the parents, working with the students, working with whomever, all you can do is set really good examples and put it out there, and someone else has to pick it up. And there are certainly teachers that are better at that, and there are students that work harder for them than they might work for other people. Whether you call it, they have magic tricks, they're good at their tricks or whatever, but you can't make someone love it. You can't make them have a skill they don't have. And sometimes those same parents that wish they hadn't quit have their children start, and they really are good at staying with it. I can't say that you and your brother never, that every time I said it was time to practice, that you wanted to quit what you're doing and come practice. You did probably bigger percentage of time than other people did. But I think that
we weren't special in that way. I mean, we didn't want to practice just like every other person on the planet. Yeah.
But you just have to know that you're putting something out there, and your enthusiasm and your passion and your expertise a lot of times keeps kids in lessons longer than they wanted to, and sometimes it keeps them in lessons and their love of music forever.
Yeah.
But also, no matter how long a student takes music, they have gained more of an appreciation and a love for music than they would have had they not taken any
Sure.
lessons. And as you found with adults coming to you to start back up, that they find they've missed it, they wish they'd stayed with it.
Yeah.
So, you can just do what you can do, and they see your enthusiasm and your great techniques and your great ability to make it fun, and the rest is kind of in their hands.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, so last thing here, I know that you've had a really neat kind of photo business happening here in the last couple of years, right? And you kind of have had a love of photography, right? And now you're kind of running a business. Tell me a minute about that.
Yeah, I like I said, I taught for 25 years. I absolutely loved that. It couldn't have been a better career or a more meaningful career, and I loved that. But a few years back, I knew that was kind of coming to an end, and that I wanted to do something else. So I had always had photography as a hobby for years and years since high school.
There's a lot of pictures of us, Mom.
Yes, there are. And so
all around the house.
So I decided that I would do something totally different, and I knew that my second career I wanted to do something with my art, and it probably wasn't going to be music per se, but I launched a photography business called the Studio 56, and it's been so fun. I take portraits, pictures of families and children and high school seniors. And then I take a lot of still life and nature photos, and I make greeting cards with those.
That's neat. You like the lifestyle stuff better, right?
I like the lifestyle photography where we meet in a park and I just capture your family being a family and children doing what they do. And the one kind of cool thing that I do charitable wise is that I've continued working with the community of families that have children with disabilities, and I do a lot of charity work with them in many ways, taking pictures of families that have children with autism or Down syndrome, and that's kind of married my first career with my second career.
That's neat.
And that's really fun.
That's really, really neat, yeah. So come check out her site, thestudio56.com or whatever, yeah. So anything else?
No.
No?
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for coming in and doing the interview. This is the first one of many, hopefully, and we'll kind of talk about it like we did today. A lot of different topics of music and teaching and music scene and all sorts of stuff. So anyway, I'll see you guys next time.
Bye.